And we're continuing now in our journey through the Beatitudes, the great sermon of Jesus in Matthew chapter 5. Some phenomenal concepts of what it means to live in the kingdom. Every kingdom has a leader. For us, that's Jesus. And every kingdom has a way of life. That is the Beatitudes. These are these attitudes that we should be taking on. And they are the beautiful attitudes. Okay, anyway, there's a whole lot of plays on words that we could play about this. But it's an amazing concept that Jesus taught. And the truth of it is the challenge that comes to us by way of living this lifestyle. Just remember, people, that this is the key to happiness. Jesus is early on in his ministry coming out of an Old Testament context where it was heavy, man. It was heavy. It was the law, and it was obedience to the law, and it was sacrifices. And there wasn't a lot of smiling. There wasn't a lot of contentment. There wasn't a lot of spiritual wellness coming out of the Old Testament system. And so Jesus comes into this particular time, at this particular time of the deadness of the old religion, and says, guys, I'll tell you, got to tell you how to be happy. And everybody say, well, we would love to hear that. Because this religious system that we've got ourselves has just got into bondage to the law. So Jesus wants you to know how to be happy, how to be spiritually well, how to be emotionally fulfilled, and it all comes out of this particular way of life. But as we have been reading and studying it, I'm sure you would have been totally aware of the fact that this is counterintuitive stuff. These are paradoxes. Or a paradox is an English term that says it states two extremes in order to make a middle point. And so we have these extremes. And tonight, as we contemplate the persecution of people, that this is probably the most extreme point. Cosmopolitan magazine made an observation. They didn't, not that I read Cosmo, but somebody told me that they had this article. Cosmopolitan had an article on how to be happy, and they said these three things. In order to be happy, happy people are people who refuse to acknowledge their negative feelings. Number one. Now, boy, does that go in the face of the Beatitudes. Beatitude number one is terribly negative. You have nothing to offer God. There is nothing attractive about you. You have no merit of your own. You have nothing to bring to God other than your brokenness and your sin. Cosmopolitan magazine would not like the Beatitudes. The second thing that Cosmo magazine says is that happy people have some sense of accomplishment based upon their own self-sufficiency. That means that they've bought into the lie that I can make life work on my own, that I have the ability within me to achieve everything that I need to achieve, to do what I need to do. Now, I have a certain inkling of sympathy towards this teaching because I think there is a measure of us taking responsibility for our lives and saying, I'm going to use what I have to the best that I have. I'm into that. But if you think that doing the best that you can is going to make you happy, then all it's going to do is make you really exhausted. That's all it really does. So that's the second thing. And then Cosmopolitan magazine really go in the face of the Beatitudes when they say that happy people enjoy people but are not self-sacrificing. That means I'm entirely in this deal for what I can get out of it. I'm entirely in this world to see what I can. I'm not going to sacrifice anything for anybody. After all, I've made my own life. I've made all this stuff and it belongs to me. I have worked for it. And therefore, I'm not going to give this stuff away. So self-sacrificing is not a big deal for the Cosmopolitan magazine, but it is a big deal for Jesus. Every one of these aspects that we've been speaking about has an element of self-sacrifice. In fact, it talks about total sacrifice, of offering yourself as a living sacrifice to God. That is the key that Jesus wants you to know to emotional wellness, psychological happiness, and what Jesus terms as this happy thing. So we kind of blow the worldly theory out of the water because Jesus says the complete opposite. Now, if you were to invite the Apostle Paul, who was an interesting character, because the Apostle Paul had a lot of things that he could claim credit for. If there was somebody who deserved to get accolades for his religious behavior, according to the Old Testament law, the Apostle Paul would have been the guy. And if you wanted to read the CV, the spiritual CV of the Apostle Paul, it would have been made really, really interesting reading. he would have said this, his credentials. The Apostle Paul should have been happy if this is all true, if Cosmopolitan magazine was right. The Apostle Paul should have been of all people the most happy, but he was of all people the most miserable until he met Christ. But these are his credentials before he came to Christ. He graduated from the University of Gamaliel. He was top student of this very great philosopher and religious thinker. He was well traveled all over the world. He spoke 5 languages. This was no fool. He was the personal friend of a king of 2. He died and he came back to life again. Remember, they stoned him. They dragged him out and he came back to life again. He spoke in tongues. Some people think that's a big deal. He'd been on a guided tour of heaven. Now, he could have bragged, these are my spiritual credentials. These are the things that make me worth listening to. And yet he goes against all of that stuff that Cosmo would have said, wow, check this guy out. He's really worth listening to. And he says, hey, I count all of that as just dung in comparison to the riches of just knowing Christ. And here he says it. These are my real claims to fame. It's all about persecution. Paul says this. I cannot count the number of prisons that I have been in. I cannot count the number of lashings that I have had. I have been beaten 3 times with rods close to death. I was once stoned, 3 times shipwrecked. I have lived in the perils of the wilderness, robbers, Jews, and Gentiles who hate me. I understand total weariness, absolute exhaustion, and incredible hunger and thirst. And I am the happiest of all people. That's crazy. How does he find this? Amidst all of that pain and personal suffering and absolute persecution, he finds this incredible sense of joy because he's found the secret that Jesus is telling you tonight, that the Beatitudes is the key to living a happy, and I'm not talking a frivolous way. I'm talking about the greatest life ever that you could possibly do with your life is to live out this teaching of Jesus. I'm going to be winding in my part of this whole series. Chad will bring it all to an end for us on Sunday. So I hope if you're able to, you can join us there. But this is my last sermon on the Beatitudes. And this afternoon, I really took some time just to close off everything else, just to concentrate on this incredible theme. What it means to glory in persecution. How do you do that? Well, the Apostle Paul did it. Now, there's a saying that Helene has on our fridge. And it says this, when you stand before God one day, he will not look you over for diplomas or degrees, but he will look you over for scars. That's what I think is a great saying. Not going to, when you stand before God one day, he's not too interested in your diplomas and degrees. Otherwise, Paul would be right up there with all of his education. He's going to look you over for scars that have come as a result of living the Beatitudes. And the reason there will be scars is because Jesus tells you there will be. He says this, that if you live a righteous life, that means if you know God and you love him more than anything else, and you live out all the values that there are in the Beatitudes, the world is going to hate you. That's why they hated Jesus. They didn't hate him because he did nice things. They hated him because his righteousness offended them. And Jesus tells you, guys, that the same thing is going to happen to you. If you choose to live this life, you must understand that persecution is going to be your portion. Now, remember on Sunday, we spoke, if you were here, about the 2 verses, verse 10 and 11 are the verses of the Beatitudes. And let me just read them to you. And we haven't got time to read the whole passage tonight. So I just want to read verse 10 to you. It says this, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. On Sunday, we spoke about those in the context of the those being the persecuted church out there. Just watch the news and you will see those as it applies to here. Those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now we take it closer to home. Our subject tonight is this one. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So when you receive persecution and the world gives you a hard time because you're a Christ follower, you're in very good company. That's what he's saying. You're in the company of Jeremiah, who was given a hard time. You're in the company of Ezekiel and Daniel, who were all persecuted for their faith. So when you get persecuted, put a smile on your face simply because you know that you're in really good company. All these other guys, who were ever anybody in the scripture, also suffered persecution. But tonight I want to focus on this. Blessed are you. We did Sunday, we did blessed are those, the persecuted church. Let's bring this really close to home tonight. Blessed are you when you suffer persecution. Now, what I want to do tonight is I want to give you the profile of persecution and bring out a couple of practical things, I hope, from them. The profile of persecution, we've already spoken about who gets persecuted, have we not? It's the righteous who get persecuted. 2 Timothy, it says, all those who live godly lives will be persecuted. That's what Paul tells you. Straight up. Not trying to hide anything. Not trying to make the Christian life look like this fairy tale, love and starry eyes and stuff. He's telling you, you become a Christian, you're going to be persecuted. And I remember the context into which he spoke these words. The context was time of terrible persecution, where Jesus had gone up to heaven. The Romans had thought that the Christian faith was just going to die out. They didn't think that it would just last very long. They thought that Jesus' memory would go away within a few years. It didn't. It got stronger and stronger and stronger. So they did what the world always does when Christianity grows. They try to persecute it physically. They try to wipe it out. Now, people have done a study on this in revivals that have taken place around the world. The tactics of Satan have not changed at all. The first thing he will generally try and do when Christianity rises up and becomes strong and there's a revival in the land is he will persecute it physically. He will bring physical persecution on, thinking that if he can kill a few Christians, it'll stop people from becoming Christians. In fact, the opposite happens. The more they kill him, the more people that there are becoming born again. It has a redemptive value, does persecution. And I'll speak a little bit about that right at the end. But I have to tell you that persecution is par for the course. Now, it says there that you are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Righteousness' sake. If you are being persecuted today because you're a jerk, then that's your fault. If you're being persecuted because you're a mean person, or you're hypocritical in your attitudes, or you're judgmental, or you're just a miserable okay, they're persecuting you, then that's not the persecution Jesus is talking about. That's because you're a jerk and you're behaving badly and you deserve to be persecuted. But Jesus is talking about the persecution that comes to the righteous. So if you're living a stupid life and messing people around, they're going to persecute, but it's not this persecution. This persecution is reserved for those who are right with God, who have faith in Him and desire to follow Him. That's what it makes it sound counterintuitive. Next thing I want you to understand about persecution. Persecution is inevitable. Get the terminology here. Persecution is inevitable, but it is not unavoidable. You don't have to have persecution. You can be a Christian and not be persecuted. Do you want to know how? I'll give you a secret on how to be that. Just laugh at the world's jokes, and they won't persecute you. Just do business like the world does, and you're not going to get persecuted. Just take on the world's values, and you're going to be fine. You will not experience persecution. You know, if you want to just laugh at its church, enjoy its entertainment, turn your head when they blaspheme the name of Jesus and ignore it, and you won't be persecuted. Don't say anything. For goodness sake, if you don't want to be persecuted, do not say anything about sin or hell. Oh, no, don't say anything about that, because that certainly is going to cause you to be persecuted. Persecution is inevitable for the Christ follower, but it is certainly not unavoidable. You can avoid persecution, but if you do, then remember what Jesus says. If you deny me before men, then what will I do? I will deny you before my Father in heaven. People, this is a big deal. This is a very big deal. So, let's move on from here. I want to talk about this profile of persecution and tell you a little bit what it looks like. It tells you the passage. 3 aspects that you'll pick up in the passage. 3 aspects of persecution. First of all, it comes in the form of insults. Secondly, it comes in the form of physical persecution. And then thirdly, it comes in the form of people saying all manner of evil against you falsely. Read the passage and you'll see very clearly it says these are the three pictures or types that this persecution can take its shape. Let's look first of all at the issue of insults. If you become a Christian, the chances are that you may take a few insults. In our culture, maybe not so many, but there's certainly in other cultures and in certain other areas or walks of life, you will take a few insults. Insults, or get this, verbal abuse to your face. They will call you names. And we all know the saying that sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. You want to bet? I don't know too many things more painful than names. That little rhyme that we teach our kids is a total lie. Calling people names, especially in the context of being a Christian, is an incredibly hurtful thing. And it's abuse, and it's verbal abuse straight to your face. I'll give you an example of that just now. Let me give you an example of that right now, in fact. Have a think of Jesus on the cross. As Jesus is hanging there in absolute agony and in pain, and he's been whipped 39 times. He's got a crown of thorns. He's got his blood has been drained from him. And the Pharisees are all mocking him with verbal abuse. Hey, Jesus, they say. You said 3 days. You said 3 days you'll be able to build a temple. You'll smash it down and you build it up again. Jesus, they insulted him to his face. The other thief on the cross growled at him and says, if you are the Messiah, then take us down from the cross and take me with you. And all these things, straight verbal abuse to Jesus' face. That's the first way that you will receive persecution. Verbal abuse straight in your face. The second one, it says there, is persecution. Persecution, and the picture here is the fox and hound thing. The hounds that are chased, the foxes that are chased by the hounds. Now this is extreme, and generally it's physical. And this is what we have in foreign countries and maybe even in our own land. Certainly in Zimbabwe, there's this thing where they're out to get you. And they're out to get you. They don't just want to call you names. They don't want to just bring disdain to you. They actually want to kill you. They want to harm you physically. That's the second aspect of what Jesus calls in the realm of what this persecution is about. It's the same persecution that Saul persecuted David with. Remember when David was up and coming in the kingdom and everybody really loved David and they would look forward to David becoming the king. Saul was so jealous and he was so envious and he was so miserable that he sought to kill David. And he chased him through the wilderness and he chased him up the hills and down the dales and around the valleys. He chased him and he persecuted David in the same way that Jesus is telling people that you may suffer that kind of persecution from the world as well. They're out to get you. And David's first half of his life is all about that kind of persecution. The third kind of persecution is the persecution where they say all manner of evil against you falsely. If they're saying it because it's true, then you're doing the jerk thing. But if they're saying it and it's false, then that's a different story altogether. There's nothing more hurtful than hearing stories about yourself of things that apparently you have said and they're not true at all. I'm sure every one of us here has been the victim of a half-truth. I'm sure every one of us here has been part of somebody else's twisted rumor-starting thing. And we all, I'm sure, will understand the pain associated with being misquoted, somebody taking something from you and making it say what it doesn't say, and they say things falsely about you. I don't often use my own illustration, but I have one or two for you tonight that will probably help you. Some years back, I was a victim of one of these things, and some of you may even remember this particular incident. One of the schools locally had a textbook that had some blasphemy in it, and it was a textbook that the kids were studying. And so the parents, the Christian parents, went to the school and they said, we don't like this textbook. We don't want our kids to study it because it's got these blasphemous statements. Anyway, the parents were making a real big harass at the school, and so the governing body phoned me and said, well, what did I think? So I said, well, I can't really say anything until I've read the book. Give me the book, I'll read the book, and I'll tell you what I think. So they gave me this book, and I read it, and sure as nuts, the Lord's name was used in vain, and it was not a nice picture at all. Anyway, after I read the book, I went back to a meeting, governing body meeting at the school, and I said to them, listen, I have an answer for you. I don't particularly like this book. Blasphemy is never something that should come out of our mouths. We're told never to take the Lord's name in vain. You know, and I feel really sorry for you. If this is the best book that you can give our kids to read as a textbook, then I'm really sorry for the English curriculum. But then I said this, and this is what got twisted. I said, but you know what? If I were a teacher, I would happily teach this book. Yo. And I said, because I would be able to say to kids, why do people use this name in vain? And I would have taken that as an opportunity to be able to say, why do we do this? Because you could take that which was destined for evil and turn it into an opportunity to teach something really good. So if you gave me this book to teach, I wouldn't have a problem with it, because I would turn this thing around and I would be able to talk about these issues and teach these kids that this is not the way to speak. Anyway, word got out from that governing body meeting that I approved of this blasphemous book and that I saw nothing wrong with using Jesus' name in vain. And I have to tell you, I think 3 or 4 couples left the church over that rumor. 3 or 4 couples left. They believed the rumor that I had said, it's okay that you do this thing. I never said that at all. And the more I spoke to these people trying to explain, the more they just said, talk to the hand. We've chosen to believe what this rumor has said. And they left our church. That was, for a pastor of a church, that was a devastating situation. They took me, and what I said, turned it into a half-truth. We all know a half-truth is worse than a whole lie. And I know what it is to be hurt by being spoken about the manner of evil falsely. Be careful. People, be careful what you say about other people. Preferably don't say anything at all, and you'll be pretty safe. But be careful, because for some people, their reputation is all they have to build their businesses on, to build their lives on, and you can so quickly, with the thing in here, trash a person's entire life when you trash their reputation. So be very careful what you say about that, because it's a big deal. The next thing I want to talk about is the place of persecution. I want to talk about the profile of persecution. Let's talk very quickly about the place of persecution. Now, there are 2 realms where persecution will come from. First of all, there's the external realm, and the church, I won't talk too much about it because we did that on Sunday. The church worldwide has an incredible track record when it comes to persecution from without. We do well. And the more persecution they lay on us, the more we grow, the more powerful we become, the better the church is when there's persecution from without. We have a great track record. But here's the bad news. Persecution from within the church has a terrible reputation. I could sit you all here all night telling you stories of split churches and devastated ministries and pastors who have left the ministry because certain things have happened in the context of their churches. And the persecution from within a church is terribly more devastating, and we have an awful track record when it comes to that. People getting the wrong message, people backbiting, people with half-truths, people with criticism and jealousies and rumors destroys the church. You destroy yourself from within, not outside. We're like Rome. And when Rome was at its most powerful and was ruling the entire world, and Rome crumbled, and Rome fell, and historians have said, how did Rome fall? They had the greatest army in the world. There was nobody who could beat them in a fight. They didn't die because a bigger army came. They died because of corruption from within. They imploded. They didn't explode. They imploded because of internal corruption. If there's one thing that's going to hurt a church or the church, any church, is going to be that. And we have to protect ourselves from that kind of stuff. Paul spent in his apostolic life so much time. I just had a look this afternoon as I was reading. He spent a lot of time trying to sort out people issues in the church. And there were some standard statements that all ran along the line of peace. In 1 Corinthians 7:15, he says this to a congregation. God has called us to peace. In 1 Corinthians 14:30, he says, God is not a God of disorder, but a God of peace. In 2 Corinthians 13:11 says, be of one mind, live in peace. 1 Thessalonians 5:13, be at peace amongst yourselves. Paul was appealing. He was not just appealing, for goodness sake. He was pleading with the church to protect itself from internal strife, because the church will implode if that happens. And God will not hold us guiltless. He will make us accountable for every word that we say. That's why that verse 9 we have, blessed are the peacemakers. It's a big deal. Let's talk about the priorities for the persecuted. We've spoken about the place of persecution, external, internal. Guard yourself against both. And then I want to talk about quickly the priorities for those who are being persecuted. There are three, very quickly. The first priority, if you're going through persecution, is the priority of loyalty. We're going to nail our flags to the mast here, and every one of us needs to do that in our workplace. I remember reading something, and a guy said this, a man started a new job, and he claimed to be a believer. So he came home after the first day at the new job, and his wife says to him, hey, sweetheart, how did the job go? He says, no, it was absolutely fine. Nobody found out that I was a Christian. It's facetious, but there's truth in that. We want to hide it. We want to make sure people don't know it. I have to tell you, that is a miserable, miserable, miserable existence. I say to my kids, the first thing you do when you start a new thing or go to a new school, a new job, or wherever you are, the first opportunity, you nail your flags to the mast and you let people know where you stand. And they may mock you, they may call you names, but I got to tell you, they will respect you for the stand that you've made. That is key for all of us, loyalty to Christ. I love this. In the first century church, I read this afternoon. There was a man, this time of terrible persecution in the church, and there was a church leader called Tertullian. And a man in the church came to Tertullian, and he said, hey man, I've lost my job, or I nearly lost my job. They're going to fire me because if I don't reject Christ, I'm going to lose my job. And so Tertullian said, well, what did you do? So he said, well, I was able to tell you, but I denied Jesus. So he says, well, why did you do that? And the guy said, hey, man, I need to live, you know. To which Tertullian replied, do you? Do you? Man. Loyalty to the kingdom. Second thing you're going to need if you're being persecuted is perseverance. There's a little saying, Helene used it often. It says, this too will pass. You will notice that persecution is not forever. And if you were in a communist or in a 1040 window country, then the end of persecution might be that you lose your life and you go to heaven, and then it's all over anyway, and that's wonderful. But in the context of where we live, I've been through persecution, and it doesn't last. It's not forever. This too has passed. And that's why it says when you are persecuted. It doesn't say you're going to be persecuted forever and all the time. It's just when or whenever, whichever version you're reading. Whenever is a better one. Whenever you are persecuted, which is indicative of the fact that you're going to be persecuted all the time. Get with it. Put a smile on your face to recognize this too will pass. And even in Jesus' life, there was his preparation phase up to the age of 30 years old. Then there was his popularity phase up to the age of about 32, 33. And then there was his persecution phase. The popularity phase of Jesus was much longer than the persecution phase. There's probably going to be more joy and greater opportunity in your life for that than there will be persecution, because persecution is a whenever deal. It's not there all the time. It's whenever. So be assured that probably persecution will come and maybe persecution will go. The next thing that you're going to need if you're being persecuted is you've got to learn to forgive. Forgive. Our greatest role model would have to be Jesus, wouldn't it? When Jesus was suffering all three of the categories of persecution I spoke about just now, and he's hanging on the cross, and one of his last statements as he looked out across the people who were gloating over him and mocking him and calling him names, and soldiers who were physically abusing him, what did he say? He said, Father, forgive them. I don't know what they're doing. When you're receiving persecution, you may need to say the same thing. We need to be good forgivers. Let's move on. the product of persecution. We spoke of the priorities for the persecuted. It's loyalty, perseverance, and forgiveness. And I want to talk about the product of persecution. I love this fact. Persecution purifies. Persecution is a way of sorting out the men from the boys. There's this Christian urban legend. I don't even know if it's true, but many pastors quote the story of a gathering similar to this in a persecuted country, probably in China or Korea or somewhere. And it was an illegal gathering of Christians. And a suddenly gang of guys ran in with AK-47s and they held the congregation up. And they closed the doors and they said, okay, nobody's leaving until you deny Christ. If you deny Christ, you can walk straight out the door and you can go free. And the little urban legend says that a whole bunch of people left. And when everybody had left who was going to deny, there was only a handful of people left. And the guys put down their guns and they said, okay, now we can begin our meeting. And I don't know whether that's true, but it's a good story. It's a good story. And it illustrates beautifully my particular point here. It purifies the church. It sorts out the men from the boys. Many people are going to leave the faith through persecution, but that's okay. They probably were never in the faith anyway. So the first thing it does, the product of persecution, is a purified church. The second, this is beautiful, aspect of a persecuted church is it's a united church. I got to tell you, persecution unites people. Did you see how united our cricket team boys were after they got a carrot from New Zealand during the day? That was a great game, by the way. We should have won, but whatever. But it unites people. They lost. They were laughed at. Everybody else was glorying in New Zealand's victory, and who could blame them? It was a great victory. And yet they stood together as a united bunch of young men. That's what happens with the church at the same time. It unites people. Go and read, people, the book of Acts. Acts talks about a united church. Persecution from without. It says in the book of Acts, it says this, that nobody in the church lacked anything. There were no needs in the church. You know why? Because people shared with one another. Those that had gave to those that didn't have. There was nobody in need in the church in those days. That's incredible. That's incredible, because those who had found it a spiritual gift to be able to say, man, God has given me this ability to, now I'm going to share this with people, and God honors that, and God gets excited about that. It unites the church. There was a man, I've quoted him before. He was a Russian pastor. About 15 years ago, he visited our church, and I invited the then congregation on a Saturday morning to come and have breakfast with this Russian pastor. I don't know if Dita and Mike, maybe you remember this. And we met in the back corner over there. And I came in early and I set up about 100 chairs. I thought, man, Oaks are going to come and meet my Russian pastor friend who came in a time when Russia was really a persecuted nation. And I was sadly disappointed because I think about 15 people came. And it was a sad thing. But I loved this man, a humble man. So I said to him, tell me about your church. And with a great smile, he spoke about incredible love for these people. And then he said this, in just a conversation. He says, I have a vegetable garden, in his Russian accent, which I don't know how to do. Anyway, he says, I grow vegetables in my garden in this freezing cold town. He has a little patch of veggies. I said, oh, man, that's so cool. You know, does that feed your family? He says, no, it's not for me. It's for my church. I got people in my church who are hungry, and I have to feed them. And out of his little veggie patch, I am so humbled. He came into my office, and I stood there and I wept as he stood there. And his jaw just fell open as he looked around my office and he saw books. He said, books. Wow, check this. He calls his wife. He says, come and look at this. Check these books. You know, man. I loaded him up with every book he wanted. I said, help yourself out. You can have any book you like. You know, and I just got a picture of a church united, a church compassionate, a church purified, a church that knew they were under threat for their lives, and yet that was first century Christianity. It was beautiful to behold. Man, persecution purifies, persecution unites. And then lastly, persecution has a redemptive value. I spoke on Sunday about the Roman centurion who saw as Jesus died after his gross persecution of all that they took through Jesus through. And that man was redeemed as he watched Jesus' persecution. And as Jesus died, he stood back and he was very familiar with death. He'd seen many people die like this. And he said, man, surely this man is the Son of God. You see, when you respond well to persecution, it has a redemptive quality to the world. I have a little incident in my life. It's embarrassing to say it. But it was a turning point in my particular spiritual journey, because persecution not only was good for me, but it was foundational when I responded well to it. It's really consolidated my faith. It's a boring little story, but I'm going to tell you very quickly. I must have been 17, 18 years old when that's a long time ago, when this happened. I'll never forget it. I was playing in a rugby team, and we were touring. And we went to this big rugby tournament thing, and they were having us in the hostel, and all the guys were taken into one particular dormitory, all of our team, and they all got beds. But because I'm always last off the bus and the last to get my stuff, I got there and there were no more beds. So I said, that's cool, I'll just go and sleep in another dormitory. So I went to another dormitory, very nervous, because I had a practice in those days that my team was familiar with me doing. Every night before I would go to bed at 8 years, I used to kneel beside my bed and pray. And I could do that in the context of our rugby team because they knew me. And no one said anything. And they just said, oh, there's Dunham doing his little thing again. That's cool. But now I'm in this group of robust young men, and I have this thing about kneeling next to my bed to pray. You thought only children did. You know? And I thought, what am I going to do? So before everybody's in there, well, lights are about to go. And I'm praying that every light goes out everywhere, so I could just sneak out and just get on my knee and get back into bed. At least I will appease my religious conscience. Anyway, sure as nuts, there's a veranda outside with a whole row of fluorescent lights, and all these lights are shining right down onto my bed. Oh, man. Anyway, I'm thinking to myself, Lord, what am I going to do now? And I thought, no, I'm going to get out of bed, and I'm going to kneel beside my bed in front of all these young men. And I have to tell you, I didn't pray. I just knelt. I didn't pray. I could feel every eye in that dormitory of about 40 boys piercing at the back of my head. And I knelt there. I thought, oh, this is like a firing squad. When all of a sudden one guy begins to mock me. And he says, hey, what are you doing? Are you some kind of Jesus freak person? You know? I didn't say anything. I just knelt there. And he started to get abusive. He started swearing. He says, get off your knees, man. What are you trying to do? Get off. And he was really shouting at me. The rest of the dormitory was completely quiet. This one man said everything, and he began to shout. He threw shoes across the room at me. You know, and I just kept kneeling there at the side of this bed, praying that the world would just open up and swallow me. But it didn't. Anyway, as I lay there, some other voice came from the other side of the room. Hey, shut up, man, said to this guy. Shut up. And the other guy said, yeah, shut up, you know, to this guy. And he shut up. And then one guy said, hey, are you like a Christian? And I said, yeah, it's not like a Christian. I am a Christian. And he said, why? And I was able that night for about 3 hours to just share my faith as an 18-year-old kid with a dormitory of another 39 rugby players. And I've got to tell you, it's something happened in my own spiritual life that night. It was like a milestone. I felt so good. For 3 hours, well after midnight, I finished talking to these kids about what it really meant to know God. I'll never forget that night. Now, all I took was a couple of shoes to the back of the head. That's okay, you know. But I have to tell you, something consolidated in my heart and in my faith that night. So when you stand strong against persecution, it has a redemptive quality. I wouldn't be surprised that night if that didn't strengthen the faith of some other little guy who maybe was a Christian as well. I'm not sure whether that maybe just being able to share the gospel so openly and so simply with this group, maybe somebody came to know the Lord. But even if nobody did, it was good for me. So persecution purifies, it unites, and it has an incredibly redemptive value. One last thing. My time is done. You guys started church 5 minutes late tonight, so I'm ending 5 minutes late. Okay. Persecution gives us real heroes. You know, persecution is, real heroes have one thing in common. Real heroes are weak. It's easy to be a hero when you're strong, isn't it? Superman finds it very easy to be a hero because he's kind of indestructible except for kryptonite. So he finds it easy to be a hero. He's not a real hero because he's got strength. Real heroes are weak people. That's why the Bible makes a big deal about Moses, who declared his weakness. I stutter, I am no good. I will never be able to lead this nation. And God says, you're so weak that I'm able to use you. Some of you are just too strong for God to use. There's Gideon, who declares himself to be the weakest person of the weakest nation, of the weakest tribe, of the weakest nation of Israel. And God says, that's why I chose you, because you're weak. And those make the real heroes. Real heroes are people like us. And I'm not being ugly. But when we declare our weakness, God says that's hero-making material. Because some of you are just, I think, too strong. It's easy to be a hero when you're strong. Have a look at the disciples. And even Paul makes it. He says, have you not checked out amongst us? There are no rich and famous and clever. And, we're just a bunch of very normal people. And some may have a little bit more than others, but we're just a bunch of weak people. And God smiles. And he says, that's the key to living the Christian experience. With the power of God within you, your weakness becomes strength, because the strength is not yours. It belongs to Him. So this thing makes great heroes. When people are persecuted and they're weak, like those who are martyred, man, the greatest heroes of all time. There's a promise to the persecuted. It says there twice. There are two promises to this particular beatitude. It says in verse 10, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And it says in verse 11, for theirs are rewards in the kingdom of heaven. Persecution leads you on a direct path to the kingdom of heaven. And when you live under persecution and respond well to it, there are incredible rewards in heaven for those who have been persecuted. So as you leave from tonight, I really hope that some of these thoughts will have dawned on you. But in order for you to weather the storm of persecution, when it comes, you may not be in it now, but it may be just around the corner, who knows? You've got to open your eternal eyes to see the reward of heaven and the rewards of the reward in heaven. Let's pray. Father, tonight we are just so aware of our weakness. You can't use us if we think we're strong, unless our strength is known to be found in you. Thank you for the beauty of this passage that we've been studying this last 6 weeks, that we learn that happy are those who empty themselves. Happy are those who mourn over sin. Happy are those who are meek and love other people more than they love themselves. Happy are we when we're hungry and we're thirsty for you and for the things of God. There's happiness in that. Thank you, Lord, that out of that happiness flow meekness and peacemaking and merciful people. Tonight I pray that we would become that kind of person. Thank you for being with us through this series. I've really enjoyed it, and in many ways it's kind of changed my perspective in life as well, and for that I'm grateful. And I pray that we, your people, would please you by living out a greater sense of love, or because we love you, not because we're legalists, but because we love you, that the Beatitudes would become a great way of life for each one of us. Thank you for these faithful people who've been here tonight. Bless them in their workplaces, their families. we just declare our love for you tonight as well. In Jesus' name. Amen.